Well, we're here to talk about your new book,
Mm-hmm.
Art Is. I'm holding a copy right here. It's really fresh off the press, just released late October, so just about a month old. And it has already received a recognition by Christianity Today. And this is a winner of the Book Award in the culture, poetry, and the arts category. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
This book from Yale University Press, I understand this is the second book that you have published from Yale University. This is the first book. This is actually my copy, has all the sticky notes here. And Art and Faith is the first one, and with the foreword by N.T. Wright. We'll talk about other books a little bit later, but this book, I'm so curious about the title. Because Art is a title, and then it has a subtitle, A Journey into the Light. And when I saw the title Art Is, it reminded me of God calling himself, I am who I am. I don't know if that gave you any inspiration or if there's any connection to this. So tell us about the title itself and its connection to the content of the book.
I don't think it was direct connection, but I do think about that passage a lot as an artist. When God describes himself, he does it in such a way that he cannot be categorized in time and space. So it's I am who I am. It is not translatable into English in a sense, because it is saying I will be who I will be. I was who I was. It's a existential question of God's being, literally being outside of time and space, and yet, as we find out in the season of Advent, God broke through that those barriers into humbling himself into our earthly fallen reality, and it's just mind-boggling to think about. Now this title, 2 words, very short, it is very unique, and initially it wasn't titled this as All Good Things. It's a collaboration with your publisher, your editor, wrestling with what is this book about, really. And Art Is became the final title. And when we thought about this, I realized that it is kind of interesting because many people try to define art. What is art? Art is this, art is that. And none of those definitions seem to, fully represent the breadth and depth of art. And so the title suggests that we were trying to do some kind of a definition to art, but it's also a recognition that art exists. Art exists in our domain, everywhere. As I noted in my previous book, we are all called to be artists of some kind, perhaps not professionally, but certainly as human beings, art is what makes us human. So that, framework brings us into this, perhaps this question of what is art. It's related to what is human. And art is a kind of a statement that affirms our humanity, and that it refuses to be categorized. It refuses to be defined in a certain way. And especially in contemporary art has been broadened, the definition of art has been broadened. And so I think it's a really profound title to wrestle with.
So the title seems like it's trying to define art, because it says art is, and you anticipate a definition of it.
Yes.
But then the book is talking about how art cannot be defined.
Right.
By the definition title, right?
Yes.
So
every chapter, almost every page, there is a statement, art is embedded in the sentences. But it's very elusive. I start out with saying art is awareness of being, awareness of the presence. And then I move into what that means for me as my journey of person who seeks the light and is journeying toward the light, which I understand to be conflicting in some way with the way the contemporary art has gone. So I note my exilic journey as an artist of constantly seeking beauty and light when the art world is kind of going the opposite way of even in some ways destroying the old archetypes of what art was. And I'm kind of pushing against that because I'm using traditional Japanese materials, still used in genre called Nihonga, Japanese painting. And these are pulverized minerals, gold, silver, what people started to call as slow art. Somatic, I'm basically making my own paint to layer and layer, or sometimes over 200 times before the work begins. And then I am, part of probably a movement of people who wants to serve the world, wants to serve the church. And I'm just delighted that a chapter is all about All Saints. The panels that are here, liturgical panels that we get to serve, to be part of worship, which is an extraordinary privilege that a lot of visual artists don't get to do. And we were able to be part of worship even through pandemic because nobody was here. But we felt it was important to have a witness of some kind through these panels that worship is still ongoing, even if we can't meet. And so we really wanted to have that presence here and to be able to work on these panels, which is the opposite of self-expression. I'm trying to do some work that is not about me, and it's about the materials, yes, but it's not about my way of even using materials. So I try to remove myself from these panels and try not to inject any kind of statements or images that had any type of association with the kind of world that I was trying to create through my works until then. And then when I did that, oddly enough, these panels spoke to me in a new way. And almost every work that I've done, and we've had some museum shows since that feature these monumental works that were based on these panels here. So they had the generative power to speak back to me and to say that this is new creation. You try to give yourself away, right? And do my best to do that. And God said, well, this might be a new way of painting that will speak to people. And that kind of negotiation experience of finding my new vocabulary, visual vocabulary, is also part of this book. It's this it's finding myself in the process of growth or through very challenging and sometimes very dark times. My mother is buried right here, and that when I was working on these panels, that's when these moments unraveled in my life. But it all kind of is part of this book that I share.
Yeah. And, as we think about who God is and who Jesus is during this Advent season, we also, I think, have the calling to think about who we are, who I am in Christ, but also each of our calling, right? So what is justice? So justice is, art is, beauty is, stewardship is. And so we think about those kind of an important part of our life, our identity, and our belonging. And I feel like this book is challenging us to do that as well for our own respective lives. This book also has something unique that is different from your other books. It has over 70 images.
Yes.
And it's because of that, it's very beautiful. And I'm not going to show you every single page. However,
but we will put it in the library.
We'll be gifting a copy to the library of All Saints Princeton Church. But it has not only images of your paintings, your illustrations, and your sketches and things like that, but also this book shows and reveals very sacred part of your life, where you shows part of your studio. You show like the floor of this anointed paintings are shown. It's very process. Intimate process that is shown here. You also share image of your very first childhood painting.
Yes.
In this book.
3-year-old
so
painting. Yeah.
So what was the thought behind sharing so many images, including, of course, images of the All Saints panels?
Well, it's a great question. I started writing a single paragraph because as I was working with my editor, Jennifer Banks, first of all, she said, coming out of the pandemic, and we had published Art and Faith, and that did well enough for Yale Press to consider doing another book. So I had many thoughts about the next book, and as I was sharing that, she said, "Well, actually, can you just write a paragraph on what you see in the world?" And I was kind of taken aback, and she said, I think we should make a beautiful book because we need beauty in the world right now. And Yale Press, I don't know if you know much about this press, but they do a lot of art books. So these people are really, really good designers and people who know how to handle images. So I felt like that was an invitation that was worth exploring. So I did write that paragraph, and it was a simple paragraph of what I see walking from my house at Fuji Farm here to the studio, which is a converted horse barn, 25 meters. And I just walked that path one day and sat down and wrote what I was seeing. And then it just opened up this floodgates of images and ideas, thoughts, theology to process. And then I realized that there was so much that I haven't thought about rationally. Like I have captured it somatically, like I'm doing this every day. So this is a process that I'm negotiating every day, and a lot of times it's unconscious. One friend saw me painting, and she said, you're like one of those baseball players, who come up to the plate and there are all these things they go through. They have motions and they, check their bats and and it's so natural and it's so consistent that you don't think about it anymore. But it's part of what you're doing that is to her beautiful. And I don't think about those things. I have not written much to pay attention to that. So this paragraph kind of opened up this possibility, and I emailed my editor and said, I think I can write a book through this way. Now, when you do that, though, the process of writing takes you places that you may be uncomfortable going, or you may not have thought, at least beforehand, that this will be the kind of a journey that you'll be on. And and I think the discipline of writing is that you have to be faithful to that. The work will start to have a life of its own. It starts to speak back to you, and you have to kind of, in a sense, humble yourself, because the words have power, and every single word that you write will hopefully have that potency of creating something new into what you thought you already knew. So it unraveled, and as I was writing these passages, thinking about these statements, art is awareness, art is hope, art is, love. And you just became this, what I call a meandering path. And I even talk about this in the book. I said, my writing is not this propositional linear argument. So if you're looking for that, you'll be frustrated. And one of the reviewers early on said, this is a beautiful book, but very hazy. It's like hazy IPA. And I like that, because I was really trying to honor this meandering journey, labyrinth journey that artists go on. And then, of course, on the cover, we have a mason bee here. This is a solitary bee that you can invite into your, we can have boxes here for mason bees, and they really help with pollination. But I love to watch these bees come out early in the spring. They're the first to come out. They go in and they come out with their butt first. They kind of wiggle out, and they fly. And early in the season, when the honeybees are still hibernating, they're out busily pollinating all these trees, fruit trees that in Fuji Farm. And so they don't go straight to these trees. They're kind of going like this and exploring, and what are they doing? They're looking for beauty. They're looking for flowers. They're looking for I don't know what they detect, but aroma perhaps. They're just meandering, but they do this important work of pollinating and allowing nature to be fruitful. And so that's an artist's journey. Artist is meandering and looking for beauty, perhaps, but it's a designed way of finding fruitfulness in culture. And so that became, all of a sudden, there's a mason bee box as I walk to the studio on my left, and I'm like, I rarely pay attention to it, but when I was writing the paragraph, of course, the mason bee appeared, and then I'm kind of traveling with mason bees. Where does it go? And it goes to this maple tree or this pear tree, and then the apricot, and that became a form of writing, right? And it is different than perhaps people who write books to make an argument or try to convince the world, persuade the world in a certain way. My writing is not linear, and so as I meandered, I found all these places to land, just like All Saints. It's this kind of a way of finding fruitfulness, community, a place where I could grieve for my mother's passing, and it became this journey that I could continue to write and explore and hopefully find beauty in that process.
Mm-hmm. Journey into the light.
Journey into the light, yeah.
So this book starts with Mason Bee. And this Mason Bee became famous, made the cover of this book.
No, that was completely the designer like forcing me. I just painted it as a kind of a dingbat, those things that you have between paragraphs. And I just sent it to him. It might be fun. Instead of using an asterisk, let's use Mason Bees. And then Dustin, by the way, I'll tell you about Dustin some other time, but he's an amazing designer. And he just had all these thoughts that talk about meandering. I would have never done this by myself. It's purely Dustin's design.
And this book ends with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Mm-hmm. So how did Mako get there from Mason Bee? You will have to find out.
Yeah.
But this book reveals a lot more of Mako as an artist.
Yeah.
And because I think Art and Faith, this book really shows Mako's theology behind everything that he does. And then now the second book from Yale University Press is really introducing Mako as an artist and the thoughts behind his creative process. Now, you have published 5 books to date. These are the officially published books.
Yeah.
And you started with Refractions.
Yes.
And this is actually the 15th year anniversary edition, so it's a second edition. And so this book has been published for, I think now 16 years.
Yeah.
And this is a collection of essays.
Yeah.
And you can meet young Mako as an artist, trying to make it in New York City, and many other stories. Yeah. But short stories, short essays, right? Essays. And then afterwards, refractive, yes. And then you publish Culture Care. Yeah. And Mako is known for the movement of culture care, which is an antidote against culture wars, antidote to culture wars.
And that's coming out with the anniversary edition.
Right. And then you published Silence and Beauty afterwards. And this is your interpretation, in a way, of Shusakendo's
Silence.
Yes. Perennial bestseller, Silence, in Japan.
And I must say, the men's group has a lot to do with this book, and we were reading Silence together.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And then you published Art and Faith, and now Art Is.
Yeah.
What is the connection between these books? You are a painter.
Yeah.
And you're not a novelist. It's not like you have one novel and then you have a similar genre of novels coming out. Yeah. But you were able to publish these 5 different books.
Crazy.
Is there any thread?
Yeah. Well, it's first of all, it's amazing. If somebody were to tell me in high school, where I couldn't write in any language. I was a bicultural kid. I went to Japanese elementary school. I was born in Boston, went to elementary school. I was in Sweden, then Japan. Just got through school, came here in middle school, high school here in New Providence, New Jersey. Couldn't speak a word of English. As a middle school student, and I talk about that in my books. Went to Bucknell University, not being able to write a paragraph. I mean, seriously. And so writing was my weakest realm for me. One that I struggled with every day in college to write, but good education. What that does with great professors there, really saw something in me that I couldn't see myself. And they encouraged me to keep writing and keep pushing. I ended up graduating with a minor in creative writing. And then after graduating, I found myself continuing to write, right? So that's one of the signs is like if you find a thread, you follow it and you push yourself and you want to be faithful to that invitation to do anything, to create anything. So I kept on going without ever thinking that these would be books or anything like that. I just wanted to continue my journey, observing and writing and responding to certain writers that I admired and I was inspired by. So it was simply a way of connecting with the world. And by the way, this is all connected with my art, because art is observation and awareness, and writing helps me to pay attention to certain details I would have missed. It's a discipline of following trails and making note of what I see, right? So that was very important to me early on to, yes, I wanted to be an artist, make it as an artist, but I also knew that I needed discipline of paying attention to what most people would miss, what I would miss, unless I was paying attention. So that journey led me to write my first book, which was a just sheer miracle of a book, because I wrote this book basically on Saturday afternoons. I was told by one of the visiting writers at Bucknell, he said, if you write 2 hours every Saturday, you will finish a novel in 2 years. And I heard that and I said, really? I mean, I don't know if that's true, I don't know if that's true, but I kind of tested it. So every Saturday morning, I would sit down and write for 2 hours. Didn't think much of it. It was just these essays, and I was at the time living in Ground Zero, New York City. I had gone through that trauma. So I had a lot of thoughts about how to live in Ground Zero, raising 3 children, right? So this is kind of my constant thoughts about, well, why art in such a context? What am I doing as an artist? I'm not like a rescue worker who can save people from those buildings, but what is my role? So those are thoughts that I started with. And I started to travel a lot because I was appointed by President George W. Bush to be on the National Council on the Arts. This came out of nowhere, by the way. I got a call from the White House. They said, you're doing some important work in Ground Zero, and President appreciates that, and he would like for you to interview for this position. And I don't know what that meant, but I got on this journey, 6.5-year journey, serving the U.S. government to identify art and culture in the United States and bring that abroad to people. So I was on a commission to China to represent U.S. in China and other countries. And so I was on the plane a lot, airports waiting. So I started writing, Saturday mornings, 2 hours, and waiting for planes, sometimes in the planes, just because it's just to keep my mind awake. I would just write these essays that I needed actually to speak to arts groups around the country and sometimes in the world. So I would just write down my thoughts, and that became my first book. So they're literally short essays, that fragments of thoughts, notes that I was taking to make sure that I sounded coherent, when I landed, and then an editor friend of mine saw these essays and he said, this should be a book, and he suggested Culture Care as a title. Again, these works, they depend on these good people to advocate for you and to journey with you to refine what your message is.
Well, as a reader of all of your books, actually the thread that I have found is very evident actually when you read the book, is that these books are all about love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And your compassion.
Yeah.
None of these books are about you. And these books are about your love for art, culture, neighbor, church, God, and many of the young artists, and especially. And so I'm really glad that these books have that common thread of Christ's love and compassion that may not have been very obvious, but I can see a thread in that.
Thank you.
And I think the last question that I want to ask you before we go into Q&A is, you talk about in this book, sanctified imagination.
Yeah.
And it sounds wonderful, but what is it? Sanctified imagination.
Yeah, Christian Wyman, the poet at Yale, asked me that same question, and I was like, yeah, I write about sanctified imagination a lot. In my previous book, I try to describe it as a theological principle of God being the maker, God the artist, the only artist, really, in my mind. But we get this invitation to co-create into new creation. And God somehow depends on us to, by faith, do something today that will lead into the next, which is a privilege that no other creature has been given. So all my books are part of an ecosystem of ideas and thoughts floating about that. I think about them in the studio as I'm working. So they have these invisible threads going in and out of them. And a reader who might find one of those threads, I'm just delighted by. Idea of love as a wellspring of imagination is one of them. And this is not a new idea at all, but it has not been, in my mind, harnessed by the church that well. That God's imagination is, right? We imagine things and we perhaps use that to create idols. For God, that gap doesn't exist. So God's imagination is literally what we are experiencing. It's a profound thought. Think about that, right? And Jesus' imagination is so-called faith, that we are, through the Spirit, able to find in our lives. So we're living in Jesus' imagination as we worship, as we take communion, as we think about, we had this wonderful agape group yesterday, and it was what Jesus imagined a community to be. That we get to be part of that. We get to imagine with Jesus what, our lives, our sufferings, our challenges. How does Jesus imagine? And so sanctified imagination is exactly that. We say we pray, but what that is doing is to agree with God and to be honest, right, with our whole being, as fallen as we are, as desperate as we are. We say to God, this is who I am, here I am, Lord, help me to imagine what you see in me, right? What you see in my illnesses, what you see in my challenges, what you see in my sinfulness. And Jesus' imagination is literally taking what you confess and then bringing out something that you couldn't see for yourself. This brokenness, this desperateness that we go through every day, the challenges of our world, the darkness that is all around us. And yet he says, look at what I see, right? And that's what the scripture does, is to remind us Jesus' parables, right? Look at the birds of the air, look at the lilies of the field, look at all these things that is abundant in the world that you do not pay attention to. And so it's kind of my confession and my way of repenting is to write books, is to say that, Lord, you are absolutely right. I am looking at ground zero and all I can see is despair. And I have this feeling of not only desperateness, but hatred, right? What do you do with that? And when you honestly put it on the pages, somehow God, through the Spirit, kind of start to open up that reality, and I'm astounded at times what that leads me to write about. And I think this book is kind of one of the refined ways that I am truly just paying attention to who I am as an artist and what I can uniquely see in the world. And it ends up with Dr. King because, I have a dream speech is almost, it begins in this argument about why racism in American liberal democracy should not exist as a principle, as a category. But then it ends, an artist painting a picture. I have a dream picture. And without that imagination, that's a sanctified imagination. That is seeing the world through Jesus' lens, even though he has been in prison, he has been beaten, he has been gone through all this reality that none of us would understand. It is beyond anything we can imagine. But even through that, Dr. King saw and painted a world that only Jesus can bring into the world. So I think that's part of why I end up with Dr. King.
Well, thank you, Mako. Can we give him a thanks?
Thank you.
Yeah, with applause. Yes. We have a few minutes of a Q&A, so maybe I will take a couple of questions. Read.
Mako, first, thank you very much for this. I've got the book, and this is a great introduction. Now,
There you go.
I have it in New York City, not here.
So
I would have brought it to get out of that.
Oh, no, absolutely.
I think you've been consistent for many, many years in this message of connecting your paintings and your books to faith. And in fact, the books and the paintings complement each other message, and it's gotten very good reception from religious leaders and religious communities. But from the artist's perspective, it's not typical for contemporary artists to have that connection. So you feel sometimes like you're kind of the only one kind of pushing this, and but it's impressive that your work has been still so much appreciated, your work, by not by individuals, not just based on based on the works of themselves, not just with the connection of faith, but how do you kind of how do you explain the connection of faith to the secular art world?
Yeah, well, thank you. Sometimes I do feel like I'm all alone, and I felt that way, especially in New York City, when there was really not a way to negotiate this world of faith and what it's called religion and art, and I struggle with those words, right? Because they're, to me, as I said, the reality of faith is all about imagination. How do you see your imagination at work? So faith, is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen, in Book of Hebrews, right? What is that faith? Well, faith is the substance. The Greek word there suggests that it is to stand under hope, the weight of hope, and which is this work that requires constant attention and diligence and maybe even training your imaginative muscles so you can bear the weight of hope. That's what Dr. King represents to me, But that constant act is not separate from anything we do so-called secular. Everything we do is related to how we imagine hope. Why do we wake up in the morning? Why do we go to work and serve in a capacity that you're gifted to do? Well, it's because you have invested hope into that future, right? Future of your children, perhaps future of your community. But to me, there's a way to capture that diligence and hope in terms of faith. So what we call religion has isolated that, right? So this Monday through Friday doesn't apply to Sunday, or the vice versa. It doesn't make sense to me. And as an artist, I'm only trying to be honest with myself, and now before God. So for me to be an artist in the world where perhaps other people don't necessarily believe the same things that you do, but I find that there's so much overlap between the struggle of an atheist, an artist in New York City, in Greenwich Village, and what I struggle with as a believer. There's just so many overlaps that I get to share with, I get to learn from these people, and they light my path in some way. So that's what I found, and I keep discovering these burning bushes everywhere, right? So I'm like, like stopping and like trying to hear God through, and it turns out that what artists should be doing. And my critique of art world today is that it has become all about self-expression and not about generosity and love. And it never should be that, right? Because art history tells us that only things that are invested in love will endure. Yesterday, we stood in the Met. I gave a tour of Van Gogh paintings and several other things. And that's what Vincent Van Gogh's life was all about. It was about love. He even said that Jesus is the greatest artist because he loved the most. And how did we forget, that connection? And artists, yes, they are honest people. So people like Emily Dickinson, people like, Walt Whitman, people, all these artists, William Blake, blatantly, they said, even though I see Jesus, this tender pioneer, Emily Dickinson said, but I cannot engage with the second great awakening that is happening in front of me, because there's a pseudo-narrative there. She was being blatantly honest, and people took that as anti-religious, right? But no, I don't think so. I think she really saw the light, and she wanted to be honest as an artist to depict that light. And her poems are Trinitarian. They sing back and forth, and they create this ecosystem of hope in a very limited, narrow window, literally from her Amherst. William Blake, the same thing. Vincent Van Gogh, the same thing. So that I don't think Frangelico, all these artists, Michelangelo late in his life, confessing to his non-sister friend about his newfound faith, right? So these are all stories that are there. I have a friend, Jonathan Anderson, who has traced all the missed narratives of contemporary art, because these were artists who had faith, whether it be Jewish faith or Christian faith, and they were kind of explicit about it, but the art world kind of ignored it, right? Because it doesn't make sense. And I can go on and on, which I won't, but thank you for asking that question, because I think it's a new age where the church can play a leading role in bringing that narrative back and creating beauty and love as part of the conversation of anything that we do, whether it be art or engineering or, sales. It's all part of the core motives of human beings being effective in the world. So,
I'm finding what the secret for me, as far as you're concerned, is that the mind is not the top of us.
Yes.
Imagination is something different than the mind. And I think history, human history, has basically made that mistake, thinking that we can think the thing through.
Yeah.
And we can't think the thing
right.
through. That basically, every once in a while, something hits us on the side of the head and we say, oh, why? I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
That's humility. That's where it starts.
Yes.
And we can then begin to realize that the mind is just a human tool.
Yes.
It's nothing more than that.
Right.
And if we don't make the connection between the mind and the heart, we end up controlling people around us.
Yeah, and that's right. And it limits how we literally can't know anything without our senses, right? We people think we see reality and let's see conspiracy, right? And we can tell the difference.
Yeah.
But really the mind doesn't work like that. And artists know this, right? So they're the first to point out the discrepancy in what you just said, which is the rational mind thinks that it's in control. But when you're an artist, when you're painting, you know right away. Like it doesn't. You don't have to paint. You can make an omelet.
A contractor is exactly the same.
Yeah. It doesn't make that reality, rational reality, doesn't translate into a furniture. Only your hands know, right? Years of making mistakes, right? And that. So we know this to be the case, and we know that the church is centered around the somatic experience of communion, right? That we get to share in that moment. It's a miraculous reality where, our hands touch the morsel, and then it opens up into this new creation, and we get to eat it, and that we know this, but somehow we have done injustice in education, certainly, to think that we can educate a child through information, through this rational knowledge. Through obviously rational knowledge is important, but it comes through our senses into the top, right? So it's backwards. We're training people backwards, and we really need to harness what every child knows playing in the sand, that there's something beautiful and messy about reality. And how do we translate that into a beautifully engineered building? Well, that's education, but we have disconnected, in many ways.
Well, Mako, thank you, and congratulations on your publication.
Yes.
And thank you everybody for coming today.
Thank you.